You've seen this symbol many times on ambulances, hospital walls, and your doctor's white coat. It's a staff with a snake wrapped around it. But have you ever stopped to question what it means or why it's there? To find the answer, we have to go back around 2,700 years to a healer named Asclepius. You're in ancient Greece and you're very sick. You've tried nearly every remedy to no avail, so you do what any rational ancient Greek would do. You pack your bags, say goodbye to home, and begin a long journey on foot for days, maybe even weeks, until you finally reach a grand stone temple called an Asclepion. Inside, you're led to a dark sleeping chamber with a mat on the floor. You lie down, close your eyes, and fall asleep, hoping that the healer Asclepius will come visit you in a dream and cure you. Now here's the only part I struggle with. Non-venomous snakes will roam freely throughout the temple and crawl over sleeping patients to inspire dreams. And I don't like snakes. I find them unsettling, as do many people. But to the ancient Greeks, snakes weren't symbols of fear. They were symbols of renewal, shedding old skin and beginning anew. So the idea of traveling long distances to an Asclepion isn't so unfamiliar to us. Fast forward to today, young men wanting a new hairline often travel across the world to Turkey, only to return a few hundred follicles richer. And we have two different goals between Turkey and Asclepia, but the same impulse being a last hope. And in that sense, the Asclepia were not only temples, but also destinations of pilgrimage and specialized treatment. And at the center of it all was a revered symbol that still surrounds us today, a rod with a single snake coiled around it, the rod of Asclepius. Today, the rod of Asclepius is engraved on the seal of the World Health Organization, the American Medical Association, printed on medical textbooks and hanging above hospitals all around the world, even at Emory. Here's my question. Why does a spiritual symbol from a 2,700-year-old healing cult still outwardly define modern medicine? And more importantly, what did it represent that we've long forgotten? My own search for the answer ironically started in a garden. I spent much of my childhood in my grandfather's backyard. It had grapevines climbing over trellises, fig trees heavy with fruit, and these poor birds nesting where they probably shouldn't have, which meant easy access for a 10-year-old Florida boy. And years later, when my grandfather was diagnosed with glioblastoma and aggressive brain cancer, I noticed change not just in his body, but also in the world around him. As cancer took root, the garden slowly withered, and so did the life that once filled it. And over the past few years, the past 6 years, cancer has taken my grandfather, along with 2 other members of my family. And I know many of you carry similar stories. Maybe you've noticed that chronic illness, cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, has a way of taking a person long before their body is gone. While battling cancer, my grandfather's body was treated aggressively. We tried everything from chemotherapy, surgery, experimental drugs, supplements, and even juice cleanses. Some remedies helped, and scans were improving. So, from the outside, medicine seemed to be working, but it was also the first time I watched medicine do exactly what it was designed to do, and still leave something essential untouched. For a long time, I thought that meant medicine had failed my grandfather, but what I eventually realized is that I had misunderstood its role. Medicine is designed to target disease, to remove tumors and slow progression. But whatever was being lost before my eyes was not something you could just excise or prescribe for. At the time, I didn't have the language for that distinction. I only had a growing sense that treating and healing might not be the exact same thing. And that confusion led me to a question most of us never even stopped to ask. What do we actually mean when we say someone is being healed? What is healing? This question became especially relevant because I'm preparing to enter medicine myself. And for us pre-meds, the path is well known. Years of brutal classes, unpaid internships, free research labor, and an unexpected number of hoops to leap through. I know medicine is my calling, but it soon became an uncomfortable one. Suddenly I was asking myself, am I preparing to enter a healthcare system that's forgotten what medicine even means? That's a pretty horrifying thought. And I so desperately wanted to be proven wrong, so I began looking beyond my own experience. At first, I asked a more general question. What does our country look like? And the research shocked me. Consider these numbers. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for young adults ages 20 through 24. Around 23% of US adults have some form of mental illness. 40.5% of Americans will be diagnosed with cancer at least once in their lifetime. And around 76.4% of US adults have at least one chronic condition. These realities are all different, but we know they exist. And yet the paradox is stark. At over $5 trillion annually, the United States spends more on healthcare per capita and as a percentage of GDP than any other country in the world, while ranking 48th in life expectancy. What does this tell us? In most areas of the United States, we are absolutely flooded with healthcare, yet we're starved for health. So is medicine to blame for these issues? Not entirely. The problem isn't exactly what medicine does, it's what we've come to expect it to do. Over time, we've placed the entire burden of healing onto medicine. We've come to believe that health is defined solely by the condition of the body. And once we reduced health to physiology alone, we handed medicine a responsibility it was never meant to carry alone. Modern medicine excels at caring for the body, and we've tasked medicine with caring for our health. But health is much bigger than the body. True health is multidimensional, encompassing not only the body, but also the mind and the spirit. Healing, in its fullest sense, requires attention to all three. So the question becomes, can medicine alone carry the full weight of healing, especially in the face of life-altering illnesses? And to our credit, our society has already started to sense that the answer is probably no. Modern medicine, by definition, it cannot carry the full weight of health. So over the past decade, we've had what I call the mental health revolution. Therapy use is up dramatically. People now take mental health days off from school and work. And universities advertise counseling resources on every syllabus. And these are good things. They're long overdue, actually. We've finally acknowledged something essential. The mind matters to our overall health. But that acknowledgement also raises a pressing question. Because if the body matters and the mind matters, what about the spirit? You might be thinking, what even is the spirit? Isn't that just some religious terminology? And those are fair questions. In health research, spirituality is not treated as something mystical or explicitly supernatural. Instead, it's widely defined as an intrinsic dimension of humanity through which people find meaning, purpose, connection, or identity. I'll say it again. An intrinsic dimension of humanity through which people find meaning, purpose, connection, or identity. For some, this includes the sacred, but for others, it involves family, community, society, or nature, etc. And for many, spirituality gives life meaning. When we understand it through this lens, the spirit becomes a dimension of human experience and is recognized as a core component in whole person health, alongside the body and the mind. And healthcare has actually recognized this for decades. For the past 50 years, it's been called something called spiritual health. And once we understand spiritual health as its own dimension, on the same playing field as mental and physical health, it's harder to treat it as irrelevant. Yet, this sometimes happens in practice. I've seen this play out firsthand quite a few times, but one encounter in particular has really stuck with me. For many years, I wanted to understand whether something as intangible as spirituality could be studied with scientific rigor. So I got involved with a clinical research study that was investigating spiritual health and spiritual distress. And one day, a physician approached me in the hospital. He glanced at my clearly labeled blue coat and badge and casually asked what I did. So I explained my role studying how spiritual distress and spiritual health interventions affect patient outcomes. But before I could finish, he smiled and said, "Oh, you're with nutrition. It's all basically the same, right?" And he was sincere, but that was also the problem. Because when mental health, spiritual health, nutrition, exercise, psychology, and meaning all get lumped together as basically the same, nothing beyond the body is taken seriously. And yet at the bedside, these distinctions do matter. Let me give you some examples. We might have two patients on the same treatment who have both stopped eating. One can't tolerate chemotherapy and declines lunch. The other has lost all hope and no longer sees a reason to eat. These are two patients with the same presentation, but with entirely different dimensions of health needing to be addressed. Or What if we have two patients reporting the same level of pain? Both are combating nerve damage, tissue inflammation, and injury. One has uncontrolled physical pain, but the other can't stop weeping, suffering because they feel alone, untethered from who they are, and terrified of dying. Their pain scores are identical, but the care they need is not. When we fail to name these differences, we default to treating only the physical and everything as physical. Not because we're careless, but because we lack the language and framework to do otherwise. Evidence suggests that spirituality affects health in ways that are scientifically detectable. This includes associations with decreased risk of mortality, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and suicide. One study, based on a large subset of observational data, included nearly 126,000 participants, and it examined the effects of spiritual involvement on mortality. It found that it generally corresponded to a 29% greater likelihood of survival. Here's another study. A randomized control trial found that a 12-week spirituality-based intervention delivered through daily smartphone messages designed to cultivate spirituality and promote reflection was associated with reduced blood pressure and improved endothelial function in patients with diagnosed hypertension. Across the board, the empirical evidence supporting spiritual health interventions is overwhelming, and I really believe the future is bright. In April of 2024, the American Medical Association passed a resolution stating that patients should have access to spiritual care, acknowledging the importance, in writing, of spirituality on overall patient health. That was huge, and it's the first of its kind. I believe we're standing on the precipice of a turning point, because if mental health defined the last decade, spiritual health will define the next. Let's pause and understand what that might look like and what has to change. At present, medical science has dissociated itself from the very impulse that gave it birth. And the story of Asclepius and the rod that adorns many medical emblems were reminded that medicine was, in fact, born spiritual, in rituals and temples, and in communities that understood healing required more than just a functioning body. For most of my life, medicine and spirituality have supposedly competed. Ideally, our aim should be complementary, with the two working together. And the goal is not to replace medicine, nor is it to make medicine spiritual again. It also isn't to transfer the responsibility of spiritual care to the physicians. We simply cannot keep trying to add the mind and the spirit back into a medical system designed only for a body. Instead, let's be humble and acknowledge the limits of a medical science extraordinarily good at treating bodies, yet ill-equipped to address every dimension of human experience. So, the heart of the matter lies in individuals of each profession, physicians, psychologists, and chaplains alike, coming to know, respect, and understand their opposite members so that they may meet at the bedside as colleagues and consultants in whole person care. We must understand that whole person care is essential and that healing is threefold: somatic, psychological, and spiritual. So if we want our patients and our loved ones to feel like whole humans again, rather than just a collection of malfunctioning parts, we need a new model. Actually, we need a very old one. I propose that every major health crisis involves not just the body, not one rupture, but three. I call this the three breaks model, and it's very, very simple. There is, of course, a physiological rupture, something in the body that no longer functions the way it should. But alongside it, there's almost always a psychological rupture: the fear, the grief, the constant mental weight of uncertainty. And beneath both, there is often a third rupture we ignore: a break in purpose, an identity, and the story someone tells themselves about who they are and what their life is for. Existential concern. Medicine is extraordinary at addressing the body. It now better acknowledges the importance of addressing the mind. However, the spirit, it almost entirely dismisses as irrelevant to whole person health. Here's something you can actually use. The next time you or someone you love faces a serious illness, which is inevitable, don't just ask, "What's the diagnosis?" I've started asking 3 practical questions with family members and patients, and you can ask them too. 1, what needs to be treated? 2, what is this taking emotionally? And 3, what is this taking meaning from? Not every illness demands all three, but every life-altering one certainly does. I'm not here to force novelty for novelty's sake. I hope to remind us of something ancient and deeply human that most of us have forgotten and some of us choose to ignore. And this is far from revolutionary, which is precisely the point. It's a reminder that healing at its best helps people cure illness, tend to their minds, make sense of suffering, and reconnect to meaning. For most of human history, true healing was understood as something that happened together in the body, mind, and spirit. What's changed isn't the human condition or the human experience. It's what we've decided counts, and it's time to remember the rest. Thank you.